I'd like to acknowledge the Wanneroo people on whose land we meet today and to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. And it is lovely to be here in a room with fellow Hunter River lovers and those who interact and have a relationship with the river. And it's lovely to be speaking so close to the Hunter River that flows through the stories and the lives of those in this book, and to the river that has played a huge role in shaping a region, shaping a nation, shaping you and I. And when I came in though, I was reminded, I had a flashback to 2.5 years ago when I was paddling down the river again. I slept under that bridge one night. I got my timing wrong and I was paddling in the dark. It wasn't going well. I phoned ahead and a fellow advised me, camp here. So I camped on a sandbank under the bridge. And Tatum, this might give you something to draw, I don't know. Me sleeping under the bridge. Because I know a picture speaks 1,000 words, but there is no picture, no words that can possibly capture the discomfort of that night. But it is nice to be back in Singleton, via road this time. As we know, we often use rivers as a metaphor for life itself, because life, like a river, meanders. It has times of bounty, it has dry times, times of excess. It carries everything from joy and hope to disappointment and tragedy. It has a beginning that flows inexorably to an end. So it means you can either go with the flow or you can battle vainly against it, but you can't really go against it. And you can't turn back the flow, especially the flow of time. A cosmetic surgeon might disagree with that, but that's my belief. And I'm hardly alone in that belief. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, and this is his quote, "You can't step twice into the same river." Or can you? In 2021, I challenged the wisdom of Heraclitus and my own belief, and I resolved to return to the Hunter to step into the river once more. So, here I am. Back in 2011, I had paddled the Hunter River after returning from a posting overseas as the Russia correspondent for the ABC, living by that great ancient river. And I decided to paddle the Hunter to reconnect with who I am and where I'm from. I'm a Newcastle boy. And so I paddled the Hunter through places that I held dear, meeting up with people who had shaped me and have been a part of my life, and meeting new people, learning from them about their relationship with the river, what the river meant to them. And I paddled from the historic pastoral estate of Beltrees to Newcastle Harbour, and it was a journey in the kayak of about 350 kilometres. And above Beltrees, I'd explored that aspect of the river by land, by foot, by driving and walking into places. The kayaking journey in all took about a fortnight. Broken in the middle because there simply wasn't enough water in the river. So I had to wait to paddle one section when there was sufficient flow in the river. Otherwise, I did it in one hit. And this is what happens when there's not enough water in the river. It was an extraordinary way to learn about my home region and the river that defines it, to learn about the river's strengths, its weaknesses, its idiosyncrasies, that reservoir of history and stories that it holds, and the uncertain future it faced, and that we all faced and continue to do so, as we demand more and more of the river and expect it to play a multitude of roles, as it has to feed so many people, so many industries, so many dreams, so many ambitions. And somehow there has to be enough left for the health of the river itself. So it's an enormous task. Well, that journey formed the bedrock to the book I wrote about the river and its contribution to the life of both this valley and the nation. That book was titled The Hunter, and it was published in 2012. And the following year, I directed and presented a documentary, an hour-long documentary for the ABC based on the book. So that 2011 journey was a wonderful experience, but one I figured I'd be flowing on from. After all, as I was saying, rivers are like life itself. You flow on. And life did flow on, including to other books involving my beloved kayak, Paul Bereda. But then, as with a river, in life you never know what's around the next bend. And so in 2021, 10 years on from that first solo paddle down the river, the world was in the midst of change, in the midst of a pandemic, of course, as we confronted new rules, new restrictions, new ways of living. And my life, like so many others, was in the midst of change as well. So faced with change, I decided to do what I often do, to take time out, to slow down, to go with the flow, to seize time to think and consider. I got paddling. And I decided in those periods when the COVID restrictions allowed me to paddle the Hunter River once more. And I did this for various reasons. For one thing, paddling during COVID was a fantastic way of dealing with COVID cabin fever. It was liberating. Another reason was that the Hunter had gone out of print, yet people kept asking for it, which was gratifying. So I thought, well, I'll reprint it, but I wanted to add something to it. And that thought coalesced with my desire to paddle the Hunter once more, 10 years on since I'd paddled it for the first book. And I thought that doing that new journey would allow me to write an epilogue and round it off that way. So that's what I thought I'd do. Now, rivers don't seem to change. They don't hold the past or the future. There's that ever-flowing now about them, this ever-flowing present. But rivers allow you to chart change, which is what I wanted to do in paddling it again. I wanted to determine how in a decade the river had changed, how the lives of those I'd met the first time along the river had changed, and how I'd changed. Now, I didn't need a river to tell me I'd experienced change. People I loved and continue to love, family members, mentors, had passed away. My marriage had ended and I had aged. So I wasn't about to use the river's surface like Narcissus to gaze into it and delude myself that I hadn't changed and that time had stood still. With this journey, I wasn't trying to return to the past either, because as we all know, if you go on that journey, it leads to one destination: disappointment. So I may have been stepping twice into the same river, but the undercurrent of that saying by Heraclitus is, you're not stepping in as the same person. And I was well aware of that. But I also knew the past could be my reference point as I paddled down the river. So I determined to start again at Beltrees, that wonderful pastoral estate that has been cared for by the White family for more than a century and a half, for 8 generations, since the mid-1800s. I might have gone too far. Anyway, it is where I began paddling in... There we are. It's where I began paddling in 2021, and that gave me the excuse to catch up with this man, Peter and Serena White, who had helped me on my first paddle the first time. And so I set off from Beltrees and from Peter's new pastoral venture there, Maramuka, in March 2021. And as I mentioned, rivers give the impression that they don't change, and water can deceive and delude you, warping time and distance. So it can feel like no time has passed and you've gone nowhere at all. However, I learnt the river indicated one very clear change almost from the get-go, from the outset, from a decade earlier. Back then there wasn't much water, as you saw in that picture before where I was dragging the kayak. This time there was a lot more water, and very quickly there was too much water. And so by the time I was paddling through this avenue of dead trees leading to Glenbourne Dam, it was absolutely pelting down. The rain was falling in thick swatches down, and I could barely see ahead. I couldn't see where my journey was taking me. By the next day, the river had told me to get out. It was about to flood. And not for the first time on this journey, I had to sit it out until the water levels dropped. Mother Nature was actually being kind to me. It was saying, listen, you're 10 years older, slow down. You can't go at that speed, which was a good thing. But it also gave me the chance to reflect on how much floods have helped shape the life of the valley and the lives of those in the valley, as Cameron was speaking about, and many of you would know about firsthand. And how for more than a century and a half, engineers and policymakers and politicians had tried to come up with schemes and plans to contend with Mother Nature. And I read a government commission report from 1870, where a board of commissioners had to inquire into, quote, the best means of mitigating or preventing the evils occasioned by floods in the district of the Hunter River, the evils. Well, that commission of inquiry concluded basically, when the river was roused, it was virtually indomitable. The floods, of course, have kept coming, and so too the research into it and human responses to it. Indeed, at a flood in early 22 at Rosebrook near Maitland, I met a volunteer who was part of a boat crew who'd come up from the Stockton Surf Lifesaving Club to ferry stranded residents across a part of the flooded Maitland Vale Road in their little rubber dinghy, in their IRB. So they were operating a Stockton ferry of sorts, about 60 kilometres away from where the ferry normally operates. And one of those lifesavers was a person called Willow Forsyth, and she's been working on a PhD researching just how flood resilient we have been and still are in the Hunter, how well prepared we are to cope with and respond to floods. Because no matter what we do, the floods, of course, will keep coming. But while that 1870 inquiry used the word evil, Willow pointed out that's not what the river perpetrates at all. As she told me, the river itself is not the curse. It's what we've chosen to do as humans to interact with the river. So on this journey, I got to speak with people who do interact with the river all the time and have done so for generations in their family, such as the sage of the river, John Wright, at Phoenix Park. And he has seen so many floods, he's lost count of the floods. But to him, again, the river is not spreading evil. It is offering the hope of regeneration for the land and for his livelihood as a farmer. He loves the river for all that it throws at him. And on this second journey, on this new journey, I was able to observe and experience change along the banks in the riparian zone and further out from there. And the most dramatic, I guess, was paddling through mining country from downstream of Aberdeen through to basically here to Singleton. And while the world has changed in its outlook towards coal and the impact on the planet for being so reliant on it, in the past decade or so, great chunks of the valley have continued to be gouged out, of course, and transported to the mouth of the river to be exported in those massive bulk carriers that are there whenever I paddle into the harbour, to the mouth of the river. So the coal trade, which is both feeding and diminishing the valley and the river, goes on. The other change from last time, from 2011, was the people along the way, or more to the point, the people who were no longer there along the way. Some had passed away, some had moved away, a couple because of the impact of mining on their part of the world. But as an assurance that the past can flow into the present, I did meet up with people who had been incredibly kind and generous to me last time, and in those moments it was a reunion. It felt as though nothing had changed, as though time had stood still. And one of those moments was here, camping at Jeff and Janine Pickard's property at Miller's Forest, so well down the river, in the lower part of the river. And more than a century ago, to encourage people to visit this part of the world, the Newcastle and Hunter River Steamship Company produced a tourist guide. And the author recounted what he'd seen from a hill near Raymond Terrace, not far from here, looking back towards this sort of scene, and he rhapsodised how, quote, there was a magnificent view of the rich alluvial lands of Miller's Forest and Nelson's Plains, the Williams and Hunter Rivers wending their tortuous ways amid the luxuriant farms of either bank. Some things don't change. The views around there are still beautiful and the land is still rich, largely thanks to the river. Another constant during this latest paddle was the kindness of people I met. That has not changed. And people who helped me and shared their knowledge of the river and how they use the river, such as Erica here with her horse Bueno. They both go down to the river to cool off. And it was a joy to see a person and a horse interacting with the river, deriving joy from the river, because I'm surprised still in that decade between the two paddles how largely disconnected we are from the river, or so it seems in a recreational sense, as though it's a threat or at best a resource rather than a nurturer, a place of pleasure and a lifeblood giver to us all. I'm hoping that's changing with the likes of like Hunter Beach, just near Muswellbrook, that we are learning to interact with the river once more. Another change from last journey to this time is that I didn't paddle it all on my own, and for a couple of sections I had company, and one paddling companion through mining country near Muswellbrook was a local landowner and the former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull. So Malcolm's a keen paddler, as you may know. He's done some paddling with other heads of state when he was PM, but he hadn't paddled the Hunter, so he accepted my invitation to paddle this part of the river and to talk about the impact of mining. He was concerned about the approval of new mines and what he saw as the lack of balance, as farming land and communities often have to give way to the commercial demands of mining and the political demands that go with all of that as well. As he said to me, what we need is a proper plan for the Hunter for the future, to plan a post-coal future for the Hunter. Well, there he is. He enjoyed his paddle at least, didn't he? He's smiling. So that was more than 2 years ago. I wonder where that plan's up to. So despite what Mother Nature throws at us with the string of floods through to droughts, despite Father Time wreaking havoc on my muscles, I did reach Newcastle, and all the way along the river, I considered what the waterway means to the First Nations people and continues to mean to them. How what the Wanneroo has called the Mayan and the Aboriginal people further downriver call the Cocoon, how that has sustained them and nourished them physically, culturally, spiritually through the millennia, and how it does for us as well. And my paddling my story merely follows in their wake. So I finished my journey, as I did last time, on Horseshoe Beach, or Dog Beach, as it's popularly known, near the harbour entrance. And standing on the beach with my kayak, I knew I was home. I felt I was home. And so I ended up writing another book that goes inside the book, the other book. So reprinted The Hunter, and I wrote about this second journey called The Return. So it combines to be the return to the Hunter. And while there are many voices in the book, including my voice, I hope the strongest voice, the voice that prevails, is the voice of the river. I hope in some ways I've captured the voice of the river. So 2 stories, 2 adventures from stepping into the same river, but in the process I've learnt more about change, that nothing can be the same. I stepped twice into the same river, I returned to the Hunter, but really the Hunter never really left me, and it never will, for the Hunter is a part of me. Thanks very much.